Welcome to Breathe In, Scream Out, a podcast for feeling it all, one breath and scream at a time. I'm Katie Healy, your guide through this sacred mess called life. Here in this podcast, we'll feel everything. We'll cry, we'll laugh, we'll scream, and maybe scream again. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome back to Breathe In, Scream Out. I'm your host, Katie Healy. And thanks for coming back. Welcome back. I know I took a little break. It is for a few reasons, but mainly because cancer season has its way with me every year, drags me to the depths of my own despair or hell or whatever you want to call it. I love cancer energy. Maybe it's because of all the Capricorn in me. Maybe it's because of the summer. It really brings me to a place that is much more introverted, and I needed a few weeks to be in that energy. Also, the end of July, beginning of August is the start of my little grief portal, as I like to call it, an annual portal feeling experience that I move through, starting with my dad's birthday and the day he passed. There's also other death and birthday anniversaries in there. So just needed a little time to catch up to me, to swim out of the depths of Cancer and back into the fire of Leo. And here we are in Virgo season. And I'm so excited to share today's episode with you. Today is an interview with Brie Bednarski. She is a spiritual counselor and teacher and one of my dearest friends. Brie and I work together in all of our grief work, our grief circles. We created a training, we call it. We're still finding the word for it. It's called Destigmatizing Grief and Experience. And it is all about redefining, reimagining, owning your relationship to grief. And we sometimes struggle with the word training because when you think training, you think you need to be certified, licensed, quote unquote, to do something. But this training is not just for teachers or practitioners or therapists, it's for everyone. And it really helps us unpack and redefine how we relate and be in relationship to our grief. And Brie is also so much more than the work she and I do together. She's a spiritual counselor. In this episode, we talk about the work that she does. We talk about her own personal journey, her dark night of the soul, or rock bottom, as some people call it. We've all experienced it, have a name for it. We talk a lot about IFS and parts work. We also talked about that in a previous episode, so we dive a little deeper into that together. And Brie just so graciously shares so much of her wisdom with us, with me. I have a lot of friends I feel this way about, but oftentimes when I'm in conversation with Brie, working alongside of her, even in our trainings or our circles together, I think to myself, damn, how did I get so lucky to be friends with this person? She really is everything you think she is and so much more. Incredible in every way. I'm so grateful to her for this conversation. I hope you enjoy this wisdom, her openness, vulnerability that she shares as much as I did, and you find it super nourishing. So here's my episode with Brie. I hope you enjoy. Brie, I am so excited to have you on Breathe In, Scream Out. Thank you for being here.
I'm so excited to be here.
And we'll start right off the bat with the same question I ask everyone. What is the thing that you're screaming about right now, always, whatever resonates?
Right now, the biggest thing is that the wellness industry has really diluted nervous system regulation to the idea that to be regulated is to be calm. And it is so much more than that. True regulation is so much more than that. A toned nervous system, a nervous system with capacity and fluidity. And through the lens of depth psychology, anything that is denied or repressed within the psyche will seek expression, whether it's through habitual patterns, dreams, or the body symptoms. And I think this is like a really missing key part of the conversation around the nervous system right now.
I couldn't agree more. And I already had a little intro at the start of our episode, just to give folks an idea of who you are, what you do, what you mean to me. So I'm really excited to dig in. But let's give everyone can you give me a little overview of who you are, what you do, how we're connected, which I can get into too once you share.
My name is Brie or Brianna. I go by both, really. I am a spiritual counselor, and I work with folks both one-on-one in groups and have a background in different somatic practices as well. So I'm also a teacher in that way.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. And Brie and I work together really closely in the grief work that we both do. We share some of similar backgrounds in teaching styles, like the breath work we both share with clients or in groups. We studied with a lot of the same yoga teachers, and we created a lot of our own grief circles. We created a grief training called Destigmatizing Grief, and I'm sure you'll come to discover as this conversation continues, we're very different, but very much aligned and very much the same. And can you share a little bit more about your work that you're doing right now as a spiritual counselor, how that integrates with all that nervous system regulation you were talking about? And I think we know that really well, but for folks, especially just dipping their toe in the wellness spaces or starting to learn more about our nervous system, what that means for them.
So I studied psychology in undergrad, along with advertising and graphic design. So in post-grad, I followed a different path. I went the creative path. And I kind of knew that I always wanted to return back to psychology in some way. I remember, like, from the youngest age, my sister used to always say to me, like, you're meant to be a therapist. Like, you should be a therapist. I just never really resonated with traditional approach to psychology and just didn't feel that thing I felt called to go back to. Fast forward many years later, kind of in the underworld arc of the heroine's journey, and radically turned my life upside down. And it started with a yoga teacher training, and there was just a snowball effect after that. And really that tipping point, as you and I think a parallel in our stories, our journeys, was grief and loss. And I had lost my dad at a very young age. And then in my 20s, lost my mom. And that underworld also encompassed the loss of my financial stability, of my health. And when I knew that my life needed to change, but I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to help myself. I was really lost. And I realized as I'm telling this story that I say yoga was the beginning, but truthfully microdosing was. Before any change occurred in my life, at this point, this kind of like pivotal dark night of the soul moment, I had a friend mention microdosing to me. And previous to that, I had a positive relationship with psychedelics and specifically psilocybin. So, and I kind of felt like I had nothing to lose. So like, sure, why not? But back then, this was like 2016, there really wasn't any public information about microdosing aside from like some Reddit threads I found and going deep in trying to find any information I could. And I, in some ways, became my own experiment, capsuled my own medicine and played with dosages and just kept like a meticulous log of the entire process and different protocols. And I mean, we could get more into that, but that, kind of the fast forward moment was that it really helped me see how much I was living in dissonance with what my spirit was asking of me, living a life that didn't feel good in any way. And so much of the health problems that also started to emerge at that point were pointing towards that truth too. So I spontaneously quit my job to do a teacher training, which, in working with so many yoga teachers in recent years, I don't recommend that necessarily. I don't regret it, but I wouldn't recommend it. That opened the door. Like, I remember that year being like, I was so hungry to learn. I could not get enough. I started studying more in depth, like the basics of astrology. I'm by no means an expert, but the foundational wisdom there, and studying human design and looking at different perspectives on spirituality and past lives and yoga. Just really specifically, like, the yoga philosophy opened the doorway for a lot of that for me. And that, journey unraveled over several years, and studying different somatic practices along the way, and my own personal journey as well. And it came to a point where I wish I could tell you the exact year, but I was put in contact with a psycho-spiritual counselor. And I, full openness, still work with this woman to this day. She's like one of the most special. I just adore her so much. She's been so pivotal. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know this was an option. I had no idea that this existed. So then in 2021, early 2021, I went back to school for my master's in East-West psychology with a certificate in spiritual counseling. Yeah, I mean, there's been a few years between now and then, but I'll pause there. That's how I got here.
Thank you for sharing all that. And for everyone listening, that is definitely the abridged version. Like all of us, we go off on many different side paths and tangents. And I just think it's so interesting that I find this too now. For a while, my acting background, and I was like, oh, that has nothing to do with the work I'm doing now. And now I see it has everything to do with what I'm doing now, dealing with people, helping transform, transmute, metabolize, move through emotions and feelings. It's just like a different avenue. And, returning back to your psychology roots, how so much of the more modern lens or this way or no way didn't resonate with you, but you're able to find your own way of taking the things that did, the parts of it that connected you in the beginning and drew you to it, and now you're making your own way. And it is kind of returning to, or integrating in a totally new way. It's the same and it's totally different, right? Like all the work that you're doing now.
It's so true. And I think that that's like one of the most important pieces of advice for people is like, follow the things that light you up relentlessly. Because even if you can't see how they're all going to come together, seeing just the next step of like, I love this thing, so I'm going to follow it. And also, this is very manifesting generator advice.
I was just going to say, if you're a generator or manifesting generator, even more, you need to follow what lights you up.
Yeah.
What lights you up, just because it interests you. Do it for 30 days. And then if it, it doesn't, let it go. But you have to follow the spark. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Because it really does all come together. Like, that's what I'm seeing now. I think really just even in the last like 2 years of like, oh, whoa, now I can see how like, oh, that random book I read in 2017 is actually like coming into the work that I'm doing now, or just, oh, that training that I did, but I didn't know why I wanted to do that training is showing up in the grief circles. And it's like, these things really do start to all culminate when we're able to learn the language of our intuition and our spirit and follow those breadcrumbs.
Absolutely. And I think we could probably do a whole 2-hour episode just on intuition and like logic, how this world has conditioned us to think that you only need to make the logical choices, and really the choices that are usually most aligned with your intuition are the ones that aren't logical. Like that random training you do and you think it has nothing to do with anything, and then it ends up being part of your business or your passion. If your life's work is not just the money you make from a thing, it's also the work that lights you up. So I'll spare everyone our tangent on that, but we could go on a few. And I think What's so interesting for me, I think in general, people are getting a lot more curious about microdosing through the medicinal lens. And I know I didn't know that you kind of use yourself as your own guinea pig. I knew the relationship you've had and have built with it in such an intentional way. But I'd love to hear about one. Brie referred to the dark night of the soul. For anyone who doesn't know what that means, it means rock bottom. It means it means when you just when you thought you couldn't go any lower, and then you're in the depths of your own despair. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how, whatever you're comfortable sharing, what that looked like, and then how that, at first, I'm sure it made things a lot more vivid and real, but then also started to transform and soften and open you up in a different way.
Rock bottom. Yes. What did that look like I almost wanted to ask, like, well, how real can I be with my answer to this?
The fucking realist.
Okay, cool.
It's my podcast.
I know. So I'm so hyped to be here. Yeah, truthfully, in the aftermath of my mom passing, I was struggling to a degree that I just I almost did not know what to do with myself. And so much so that I think I had lost my dad as a child, I mentioned. And I think over those years, there was so much numbing and suppression and self-abuse that occurred to relentlessly push away the grief that I did not want to feel. And then, even while my mom was still here, I found long distance running, or it found me as an outlet. And I was addicted to long distance running. For a time, I've run 3 marathons and countless half marathons, and it was such a big part of my life. And I share this because it was a lifeline. It helped me in ways that are ineffable. I cannot articulate how deeply running was supportive for me. And my mom, I did my first half marathon on Father's Day, and my mom came, and it was so special to have her there. And it felt like a real turning point for me, because it was the first time I was kind of alchemizing and metabolizing everything that I had been suppressing for so many years. And I say this to say that after my mom passed, it felt like none of that worked anymore. I couldn't outrun the grief. It didn't matter. And then my body quite literally started shutting down. I got into a really bad car accident. I had taken on my mom's car. This is, a long story that's not worth our sharing here in this moment. But just to say, there was this series of events that were occurred where I had my mom's car. I got in a car accident. Person tried to sue me. I ended up needing to declare bankruptcy because of it. And it felt like the walls were caving in. And on top of all of this, my body started to shut down. I lost feeling in my left leg and was experiencing on and off bouts of truly debilitating back pain, to the point where I couldn't walk or dress myself. It was really challenging to go to the bathroom. And thankfully, my absolute king of a husband, boyfriend at the time, was took such good care of both my heart and physically my body. And all of this, now in retrospect and through the work that I've done, I can see how much my body was just expressing everything that was suppressed. But in the height of all of this, it manifested as suicidal ideation. And I just could not see a future with me in it anymore. And I knew I needed to share that with someone, but I didn't know how. When I had gotten to this car accident, I said to the angel of a nurse that was there, she was like, I cannot believe you're alive. I can't believe because I exited that car accident not a scratch on me. And my car was completely totaled. And I said, I wish I wasn't. And she was like, oh, honey, like, and it was the first time I said that out loud. And the admittance of that, once Scott had arrived, my husband, he had to be informed that like I had shared this with her, and, they take that very seriously, as they should. But it felt like such a relief, because it was like, oh, now the cat's out of the bag. Like, Scott knows. I've said it to someone other than myself. Like, it's out. And yeah, and Scott took that really seriously, as well as he should, and advocated for me seeking help, and I knew I needed help. And that was when I ended up turning to microdosing, and that's, what that dark night of the soul looked like for me. And it's of course different for everyone. And just to layer in your astrology wisdom to this, I was also in my Saturn return in Capricorn, like 11th house. So how that really helped me, I think we could probably spend a whole hour talking about, plant medicine in general. In so many ways, I think now microdosing, or the psychedelic movement, is sort of like being positioned as this cure-all. I like this phrase of like therapy and 10 years of therapy and one night, all these things, and I really don't resonate with that at all, or agree with that approach. And so, then working with the psilocybin really became an ally. It felt like I was less alone in my aloneness of what I was experiencing. It felt less alone. And they helped me to see the ways in which I was contributing to my own suffering, truthfully. And yeah, compounding the suffering. And I think this is one of the most challenging pivotal moments in like psycho-spiritual growth and development, is holding the paradox of acknowledging that like trauma and what occurred to me was deeply traumatic, and that it was so painful, and I by no means think I deserved any of that, right? There's that truth. And that it was absolutely my responsibility to heal and to take care of myself and to navigate my way out of that dark night of the soul. And, this is, again, it's like a very nuanced fine line in this like charged phrase of victim mindset. And I want to acknowledge that it's a charged phrase, because back then, like, there is a reality to that, right? Like of being a victim of circumstances that are outside of your control. And there's a reality in which like only you can step in as like the heroine and hero in your journey. So I think that microdosing helped open my eyes to that very gently. And this is one of the, I think, most potent things about microdosing. It is such a subtle opening that you're able to integrate the lessons in real time. So as you're like kind of rewiring these mental pathways and seeing things in new perspectives, and like, whoa, like, okay, now I'm feeling this thing that I've never felt before. You're able to integrate it in your daily life, as opposed to experiencing these larger expanded states of consciousness and then needing to like slowly integrate them into your waking life, which also is, a big part of my path and been profoundly important. So it's not better than, it's just, I think one of the benefits at that time was that for me.
Thank you for sharing all that and sharing so openly. I mean, I've been lucky enough to hear all of this from you before personally, and it still does something to me every time, because I think so many people feel that way in their dark night of the soul, rock bottom moments, something they're carrying around, that heaviness. those feelings, those thoughts of this idea that it would be easier or better if you were not around. And I'm so glad that thought, feeling, belief is not a reality at all.
Me too. Thank you.
And I'm so grateful to that nurse and our King Scott. You're King Scott. We love him, our Libra King. But, you know, just all of that. I mean, you shared about just feeling like you had almost run out of options in so many ways, like the full surrender, right? That's kind of also what comes along with when you think you're at rock bottom, and then you can muster a little more, and then you reach that next level where it's actually the dark night, the rock bottom, and full surrender is required. And all the ways, these ideas we have about thinking about even just your journey in terms of the grief you experienced with your dad, and then what was required of you after your mom passed away, like that first version of grief, how we're taught in this country to deal with it, run away from it, find habits or hobbies. Not that running isn't an incredible form of catharsis and release. If you've been to one of Brie and I's circles, our work together, we encourage people to do all the things that they need to really start to find a way to work with it, not against it. So I do understand deeply, even in my own journey, like this catharsis through movement is so powerful. But the ways, almost when your dad passed, how you repressed, and then when unfortunately you lost your mom as well, then how everything turned upside down, and it was no longer an option to run from it, to pretend, to suppress. And I find so many people on a grief journey, even not just loss of a loved one, physical loss, right? Loss of a relationship, a job, health, which you also discussed. Like, there's a point of almost like, I know this sounds daunting. I also want everyone to know Brie and I laugh a lot when we talk about this stuff, so we will be laughing. But that point of no return, right? When you can't keep going the way you were going. And I think it's human nature. Joe Dispenza talks about this a lot. Unfortunately, it's almost like human nature. We have to hit that bottom of the barrel. He would love that if we could all transform from a place of our highest vibration, most enlightened, but usually human nature requires us to be at that lower level to finally reach our limit in terms of whatever that looks like, right? Whether it's emotionally, physically, financially, how we're living our life. It's so, I say the same thing, like our trauma is never our fault, but our healing is our responsibility. And my therapist loves to say too, it's okay to throw the pity party. Just put a time limit on it. We put a time limit on like how long we indulge in that state of being.
Right. And I think when it comes to grief as well, like there has that pity party, like, and this is a truth, I think, even outside of grief, just like within depth psychology, that those parts of us that endured the indescribable or whatever that traumatic experience was, like, need witnessing, and they need space to express and to feel safe in that expression as well. So I think, there is no way to bypass that part of the grief process. And in so many ways, grief in itself is an altered state. It is an expanded state of consciousness because it shifts the way that you view life. There's that distinct sense of before and after in any grief. And I think for you and I both, like, a big part of like our work in talking about grief, and especially over the years of holding these grief circles, is expanding the perception of what grief is beyond just the loss of a loved one, because it is, as Francis Weller says, a sustained note in the song of being alive. It is the thread that weaves us all together. There is grief in, even if you sat in isolation by yourself your entire life, you would still experience grief just because you'd age. And there's grief in who you used to be, both physically and mentally. Like, there is grief no matter what. And I think this is, I realize I'm jumping around a bit, but just to mention that, I think why I'm so called towards bringing the natural world into the work that I do, but here with grief, is that the ultimate mirror of all of these things. Like, the natural world is an opportunity to like come to greater awareness around these truths, that death is what connects us to aliveness. We see that in forests.
Death gets such a bad rep, and grief gets such a bad rep in American modern culture, right? In the 7 to 10 business days, when you experience a loss, mostly people think of grief as this death of a loved one or death in their close community, family, nuclear family, whatever that looks like. And, we want you to move through it in 7 to 10 business days. And we've done such a good job of fucking up the space, like, and how natural grief and death and life cycles are. And like you're talking about, not just with the assistance of plants medicine, Brie's really talking about actual nature being our mirror of what it means to be in these life cycles and these death cycles. And even when we think back to cultures or groups of people that identify so closely or have such a more integrated relationship to death, and they usually are the people that have a much more integrated relationship to nature, whether that's honoring it, working with it, paying homage to it in all the different ways. And I mean, nature and just animals in general have such a different, simpler acceptance and relationship to it. And I always like to say life is simple, people are complicated. We make the things complicated, and that's not to be dismissive of how painful grief and loss is. And I don't think there's a person on earth who shares a deep love and connection and loses someone they love, whether it's through death, a breakup, distance, a friendship breakup, not just romantic, and that doesn't feel some kind of hurt and pain. But this idea of, there is no life without death. And like you always say, honoring death allows us to honor our aliveness in a way that we often forget to take for granted, when we're obsessing about these things that are so beyond our control and get in the way of the appreciation that exists through like this birth, life, death, rebirth cycle.
And just the parallel between this entire conversation and spiritual growth and development, because there is, whether it's an underworld journey, like, or rock bottom, like we're describing, or just a liminal space where there's this sense of like, well, I'm not really who I used to be, but I'm not quite sure who I am or who I want to be. And this integration that needs to happen, and how much of that liminal space really is a fertile ground, because the possibilities are limitless from that space of who you can embody and become, or unbecome, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in that liminal space, I've been thinking so much about all the ways, especially 2025 has been asking us, demanding us to expand, whether we like it or not. And, we think about expansion, we think about contraction, but we often miss, again, that liminal space and everything that lies in the middle there. Even going back to kind of what you were talking about earlier with all the ways wellness, and even with microdosing, people want it to just be the end all be all. We take these things, these beautiful natural gifts and things, and then we want to make them right or wrong, black or white, and we want to just lean in. It's all or nothing all the time. And Lord knows I can be an all or nothing person, of course, with my emotional spectrum, but we miss so much when we're only in the expansion, when we're only in the contraction, like all that time, I think about even the pressure I put on myself to always be changing, growing, producing, making things happen instead of just, I think you're an expander for me in this way of the ways you just allow yourself to be in that liminal space and be in the in-between and the learning to slow down and appreciate, and, you know, when the time is to be in the expansion, when the time it is to be in the contraction, and when like all the beauty that sits in between that.
Oh, thank you for that. And yeah, as you're talking, I was, you know, just thinking what an expander you are for me. And I think for, you know, this blessing of this podcast is how much like there's such a strong difference between feeling your feelings and intellectualizing them. And, you know, coming back to grief work, I think that is something that you and I, like a pillar, we kind of hold in that work together. And here I think part of like learning to be in that liminal space is also learning how to fully feel the experience that you're having in any given moment without like narrating it or writing a story around it or having an expectation around it. One of the like core modalities I bring into my work, and that has just been profoundly impactful in my like personal journey, is internal family systems, or IFS. And you know, you sharing that idea of like comfort in the liminal space, like I think a lot of that comfort has come from that work of these internal family systems. And to explain a little bit in case, you know, anyone listening hasn't heard of this, internal family systems essentially is a therapeutic approach rooted in the idea that we are not one thing, right? This idea like, oh, I'm Brianna, and that's it, right? Every thought I have, every emotion I experience, it's all Brianna. And that, like, there's truth to that, right? And IFS teaches us that we are really a system of parts within us. And within that system, like each of these parts can play different roles within the system. For example, there are protectors. This might look like, maybe, let's give the example of maybe you were younger, right? And you were spinning around your house, like dancing, and maybe you knocked something over, and a parent is like, yells at you for this. And in that moment, there's this like part that's like, oh, whoa, it's not safe to take up space because I'll be punished. So now this like very unconscious part slowly starts to, you know, throughout your life and many, many, many years later, you're like, why do I feel so uncomfortable like expressing my body when I'm with people? Why do I feel so uncomfortable taking up space? Right, because that part is protecting you because it hasn't found safety in that yet. So IFS is essentially, and there's many other parts, and you know, within the system it's much more complex than that, but is essentially working with these parts to give them an opportunity to feel witnessed, heard, expressed, unburdened, so that they can integrate back into the whole. Because there's also this belief or knowing within IFS that we each have a self within us, capital S self. And what this is referring to is a part, or our psyche, this knowing within our psyche that is calm, compassionate, wise. Like I would describe it as like an inner compass, or even like that when you're feeling like deeply resonant with your intuition and just like this knowing, unshakable knowing, like that's the self. And IFS, like part of it, besides integrating, you know, these other parts into the whole, is also to help these parts become aware of the self, that like there is this self driving the system, and like they can become unburdened in these tasks that they've taken on. Within these parts, there's also an element of exiles, or parts that have been fragmented, like exiled away from the psyche. And this often, can happen in significant trauma, when something is like not safe to feel, not safe to be there. And anyway, one of the like really core tenets that I believe is why IFS is just such a healing modality is that it asks for compassion and this approach that all those parts are valuable. They're all valuable. There's nothing pathological about any of them. They're all rooted in helping you in some way, shape, or form, even if that protective mechanism is no longer efficient in your life. And, just to say that one of my personal biggest takeaways from this work is compassion, and how much I really, really believe compassion is one of the most motivating driving forces for evolution and growth and greater self-love and all of this. And that like true change comes from that place. And it's never going to come from self-criticism and self-hate and these other like kind of factors that we perceive as motivating. So in that liminal space, it's like, well, how much can I notice maybe like, well, what part is here right now? Like what is at play? And also, how do I cultivate more compassion around that instead of trying to like rush the process? Or, one of my phrases that I'm guilty of saying for sure, I'm not exempt from this, but that I also like do my like really want to steer people away from is this idea of like, well, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What if nothing was, right? And that's sometimes a harder truth. And I think IFS brings us back to that in that liminal space, and like, oh, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I here? It's like, well, why? Okay, let's look at that with more compassionate eyes. Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that so beautifully. And I've just dipped my toe a little bit in and had a previous guest on talk about how powerful it was, Krista Williams, for her own transformation too. And it goes back, really simply put, what we were talking about just a few minutes ago too, this idea that we want everything to be like black and white, like this part is good, this part is bad. And when you start to engage, not just, I think we use the word compassion, we almost automatically think it's what we need to have for other people. And we don't always consider it something. We talk about self-compassion, but I think, when you say the word compassion, people assume like, oh, how I should be more compassionate towards others. And I find even the people that struggle with compassion towards other people, it's because they don't know even more so maybe how to engage with that part of themselves. And like they're projecting, I certainly do it, like their impatience or their misunderstanding or their anger, their frustration, because they're not willing to, even practice that internally. And it's this part of us that, how I feel about using those words good and bad about things. I don't like it. And I would love to hear your take on this, but I think people are so, even though all of the stuff we're talking about, right? Like even microdosing, natural, normal, normal thing, a natural remedy, all of these like IFS work, all of the different things that you do, your dream work, your journal work, all the yoga, breath work. I find it so fascinating that people are so hesitant to try these things because it requires them to kind of, I think it's because it starts to require them to, one, have to give it to themselves, not just other people. And it also just starts to undo everything we've been taught.
Yeah.
And I want to hold space for everyone listening to, like, they make it sound so easy. Like, I'm screaming at the sky at least once a week. Like, I wish I could go back. Like, I wish, sometimes I even go as far as saying, like, the ignorance is bliss. That saying exists for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not simple, but I think everything Brie shared about her personal journey, everything I've shared today or in other episodes, like, there's an initiation process that once it happens, like, there's no going back, and everyone gets there in their own way. But I find it so fascinating that people are, so much more likely to do the thing that they've been told will fix them instead of exploring something new, because it then requires them to start to question everything they've been told or made to believe. I went through that. I still go through that sometimes. I'm like, wait a minute. Again.
That is so real. Yeah. And I'm like, I have so many thoughts on this topic. I'm like, I don't even know where to begin on this one. Like, and first, just to say that if anyone thinks that I'm making it look easy, then I've done something wrong, perhaps, because
I haven't checked out your social media posts.
Yeah, I do my best to keep things like so real for that reason.
No, we're two Sagittarius Mercuries. We're just saying whatever comes out of our. It doesn't even go through the head. It just it goes heart, mouth.
Yes,
that is heart, mouth, no brain.
It's the perfect explanation. Thank you for that. That is, I just feel so seen in that. It's true. It's just heart, brain. Yes. Yeah. And I use that word unbecoming instead of becoming before. And this was like one of my presentations in my master program, because it really is a process of unbecoming, instead like untangling from all the societal narratives and belief systems and everything that gets put on us and that we take on. And that unraveling and that unpacking sometimes feels worse before it gets better, is the truth. And I think that that's intimidating as hell. That's very intimidating to be like, especially in contrast to a society, right? Like, and I talk about this a lot when I work with people with microdosing, because it's a similar, plant medicine in general, right? Like, it's a different paradigm when we talk about this sort of world in which we've grown up, where, let's say I have a headache and I am like, oh my gosh, I have such a bad headache right now. I'm going to take something to alleviate this headache. And there's absolutely a time and place for all of those types of medications. So this is not anti any of that. Just to say that it is a different approach. And I think that so many like other therapeutic models sometimes follow this, where it's like, well, this symptom is happening, so let me make that symptom better right now. Right. And that works temporarily, right? This feeling of like, oh, I'm experiencing anxiety. And this is full circle coming back to the idea of regulation, where the conversation of regulation falls short, and calming, right? Like, I'm experiencing anxiety, so I'm going to like regulate around this anxiety. And maybe that breathing practice genuinely does resolve the anxiety in that moment, calm the symptom in that moment. Maybe that the whatever stops the headache in that moment. Okay. But whatever was seeking expression from the unconscious is going to continue to seek expression and get louder and louder and louder until it's actually resolved and looked at and metabolized. That word that you so often use, that I love so much. And this, whether it's microdosing, depth psychology, the way that we look at grief work, all of these modalities and realms that like I really believe in and really steeped in is actually looking at like, well, okay, that symptom that it's expressing itself right now, what is asking to be seen and witnessed or felt? And that process is not immediate. It's usually slower. And not to say that, like, I mean, I at plenty of sessions where clients come out and they're like, I feel so significantly better than when I joined this call. So it's not to say you're coming out feeling worse than you go in, but that process of unbecoming and unraveling takes time. And we're a society of instant gratification and immediacy, and that the patience is a lot harder, I think, for a lot of people to trust, to agree to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what I will say on the others, like, I'm not on the other, it's a, I'm still in it. It's a never ending, individuation journey is from now until the end of time, until I return to the earth. But that it's so fruitful. It's so fruitful. Like I right now, I live in zero chronic pain. I have healed from autoimmune conditions that I was told I would never heal from. I absolutely love my life. I love the work that I do. I love the relationships in my life, the friendships, the sisters, my husband. I'm not exempt from pain. I'm going through it right now with my poor dog who just went through a really traumatic injury, and I'm navigating that. But even amidst that, like, there's this greater, that self that's like, I really do love my life, and I feel connected to something bigger than me, and I have a connection with God and my spirit and intuition, and that guiding force is so worth cultivating, because it's not a band-aid. It's really like a path forward.
I love that so much. And I think you kind of exactly said what I was about to say. You're not exempt from pain. And I think we are taught or made to believe, not everyone, I'm generalizing, but that a good life means a pain-free life. That if we're good enough, if we follow the rules, if we do what's expected of us, if we do things the right way. Aquarius full moon is coming up. We're recording this in August. So of course I'm coming up against all these, like, who's to say what's right and wrong? But if we do things as we should, that will be exempt from things being hard. And sometimes I'm like, wow, how egotistical of human beings to think that if we're, and I fall, how could this happen to me? I'm so good. I try so. I fall into that pattern too. And it's old habits die hard. And they may always, some may always sneak in. Even in astrology, there's this idea that we have a primal wound we'll always be working with, uncovering. Chiron was the wounded healer. He wasn't able to heal himself. So it's this idea that, yeah, to be in pain, whether it's physical pain, emotional pain, stress, anxiety. And of course, they're not states that we want to live in permanently, or that anyone should have to deal with permanently, that anyone, especially the severity in which, there's a time and a place for most things. And a lot of modern medicine, like you shared, can be really helpful and powerful depending on what it is you're dealing with exactly. But that urge that we have to constantly, lately I've been saying in my classes, can you resist the urge to fix, adjust, to make it neat and clean? Like, can you just be in that part of you that feels a little undone, to learn how to accept it a little bit more, make peace with it a little bit more, however, you refer to it. But I've been thinking so much about that, that a sign of living a good life is always going to be pain-free, that there's something we can do to avoid the heartbreak, the friendship breakup, the death, the loss, that we're somehow, if we're good enough, we're exempt from it.
Yeah. And how much of suffering is compounded by our avoidance of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're describing there too is this good or bad sort of like causal thing of like, oh, if I do this, I'm a good person, this won't happen. Like even coming back through IFS, like my first thought is always like, well, what part of you at what point in life made that association between if I do this, I'm good and I'll receive X? Because that's a really great question, like for, and this is where I think IFS parts work too is like so accessible, because like, yes, it's definitely work best done with someone, but then that like can translate into real live, like lived moments where you kind of feel these parts present, right? Like, oh, I'm noticing that like even before this call, right? Like before podcasts, I tend to get like, I was very nervous and I was like kind of like anxious energy, and I could have sat down and like done a meditation to try to calm the nerves, but instead was like, okay, what part is like really present right now? What's happening?
Yeah.
What am I actually feeling? And it's like, oh, right, there's a part of me that's really scared that like if I say the wrong thing, people are going to hate me. And then if people hate me, this is going to happen. It's like, oh, okay, whoa, like that's big. And then like breathing into that and giving that some space to be here. And then noticing like what else comes up. And then I'm like able to more fully be here in presence in self, because I didn't try to suppress that nerve that was there. By regulating it, I was able to like give it some space, and like then I put on a song and danced a little bit. It was like, okay, right, that's what I needed. But I think everything that you're saying too is like, I really like this word like capacity or feeling more resourced. I think I prefer so much to feeling regulated, because it's a much more accurate description of what we're talking about, like the capacity to be human, to know that like things are going to feel messy and that it's not going to be perfect, and like how can I be with my humanness in that and expand my capacity to be with the pain and the joy and all of this. And even like over the years, how many times have I been like, Katie, I'm done with grief work. I'm
Every time.
I know, every time I'm like, Katie, I'm done with grief work. I'm not doing it anymore. And the truth is the word initiation, which like I just love and resonate with so much too. Like I feel like both of us, I'll just speak for myself, like I've just been initiated into this in a way where it's like I'm like, well, I'm not going to talk about grief, I'm not going to talk about death. And then of course I talk about those things because it's so much a part of like my path and how I view things. And anyway, the point of sharing all of this is that for anyone listening who it's like, wow, that feels really heavy, I really want to say that I think at this point in my journey, for the first time really in the last year, that I feel like I'm operating on a like completely different operating system, where I am like the possibilities feel infinite. Like I feel such a strong sense of connection and joy and like play in a way that I haven't really had access to before. And I think so much of that is the willingness to confront or be with these parts of ourselves that we deem less than.
Yeah. I find that word willingness too, like we just need to be willing. You don't need to have to know how it's going to work. You don't even need to know what to do. That's why people come to you as a spiritual counselor to work with you and sit in that space with you and work through different things like IFS and breath work and however you would guide them through a session and the plan that you make for them. Or people come to me to dig into their birth chart. There's also this thing sometimes I know I can do this to myself, where I think I need to know how to do everything right away. And people go to a traditional talk therapist because they know they don't know how to guide themselves through that part of analysis or they're trusting that that person is, for whatever reason, they put their trust in them. Not always, but usually, when they go to them and they trust that they know what they're going to guide them through. And I would ask people listening who are apprehensive of all of these things to like put that same level of trust in your yoga teacher, in your spiritual counselor, in your breathwork practitioner, in your Reiki person, if you're feeling like they are, because of whatever bullshit we buy into, right? Like these are ancient ways, ancient practices, ancient things that we all know how to do, and you know how to do it too. We just went and got a certification for it, right? Like we all have the capacity to do this work and tap into these parts of ourselves, and all it requires is the willingness. You don't need to show up with anything else, just the desire to learn, explore, open your mind up in a certain way. I think the willingness is everything. And like, don't worry about the rest. Just bring your willingness to open or explore or play.
It's so true. It's so true. And any good facilitator, counselor, teacher, medicine woman, anyone is going to direct you back to yourself anyway. Help you remember that within yourself, that really like you are the medicine. And so much of this work is like a remembering of that.
Absolutely. And not to minimize all of the hours and hours and work that we have all done to be able to hold space, facilitate, train, guide, however if you're a teacher, practitioner listening, refer to it. But I always like to say, nobody knows what you need better than you. Sometimes we just forget. We just need to remember. It's not even learning something new. I find it's just a remembering, a relearning. All those kind of like what you've been sharing about IFS. It's just tapping into those parts of you that had a moment, an experience, were made to believe a certain thing to be true, and it's getting into relationship with that part of you and seeing how it serves you in whatever way it is. And my favorite meme, whoever invented healing should have made it a lot more linear. But it's like
yeah.
That process of like, if I do A, B, I'll get to C. That's not how life works. I like to remind people when they get caught up in well, if I do this, it should end up in this. We get so that part of me, I do it too. I'm like, oh, that little human ego, that little part of you that, thinks if you do A plus B, you'll get to C. And so often, I could have never anticipated that we'd be here doing this or doing the circles that we do or doing our grief training. And I often say it's the most unpopular thing I do, but the most important. And I will forever let you say you're done with it and wait till you come back around, because there's no one else I want to do this with. And I say, I get it. Okay. Let's talk in a month.
Yeah. I so appreciate your grace in that. No one else I'd rather do this work with either. And it's true. That very first grief circle I did, like I never thought that it would be here. Like that, the very first one wasn't even with any intention of it being like an offering for like a long-term offering. It was like, I want this space. It doesn't exist. So let me create it. And having the opportunity to co-create with you, and then what it's turned into with our grief-informed training. So for, I guess, everyone listening, Katie and I have an offering called Destigmatizing Grief. It is a grief-informed training, although I think both of us are like not a huge fan of the term training, so we're seeking a better one.
Definitely.
That's what it is. For really anyone, whether you are a facilitator, we've had therapists in the past, or end of life care, or perhaps someone who you yourself have navigated big loss, or you're just curious about this innate part of being human. This is an extended experience to really deepen your capacity to be with grief first and foremost, and also look at grief through different perspectives, through different psychological perspectives, how different cultures and societies navigate grief, how grief is held in the body.
I think at the root of what Brie and I try to do is, or work to create in our spaces, is exploring the different ways to, like I've said many times, metabolize the pain, the hurt, the relationship to, the resistance, the whatever it is that comes up around grief. And we really believe, just from our perspective and our trainings and the things that we've experienced as grievers, and then also now as teachers, practitioners, is somatics is the big missing link. Somatic is anything that we do to use the body to process emotion, right? So that could be breath work, that could be Reiki, it could be yoga, it could be embodied movement, could be sound healing, art therapy, journaling, even storytelling to a certain extent. We've explored or are exploring all of these things in our bi-monthly grief circles, in our previous grief circles, in our training, and there's just such a wide realm of possibility. And I have absolutely been told before that I'm obsessed with death, and that's fine. And I don't believe it. I think I'm just more, unfortunately, have been required to become more aware of it. And I thought that was a curse when it was happening. And now I know what a gift it is. Like I shared before, Brie always says it's really about honoring your aliveness. So we dive into all the things Brie shared. We dive into the different ways you can use somatics for not just grief work, but it's really not even with the intention of folks needing to go out and create their own grief circle. It's just to give them the tools, the space, the permission to explore grief in a different way that our ancestors honestly were doing thousands of years ago. We know what to do. We've just been conditioned to believe there's a more efficient way of doing things or productive way of doing things.
Yes, exactly. And one of the lines, I don't know which one of us wrote this, but this work is really meant to be an anchor and an expander for what's possible when we sit with grief. And as a sacred teacher, truly, that it is. And how many times this was really burst over the years of, one, the grief circles never feeling long enough. They started as an hour, and then it was an hour and a half, and then it was 2 hours, and it just never feels like enough time. And also, how many times over the years, and Katie, I imagine you've gotten these types of questions too, had people reach out that are like, hey, I just lost someone, or I know someone that just lost someone, and I'm wondering, like, what are some good things to say to them, or what should I, like, what are best practices? What should I not do? Like, just this trepidation around how to support those navigating grief. And it is, we're a grief illiterate society. And a lot of this training is creating literacy around that, so that we can hold one another with more compassion, more grace. Because inevitably, whether it's you or someone you love, like you'll, be touched by grief in some way, shape, or form. So being able to create spaces like these, I really do believe is, like Katie said, the least popular work that we do. This is true. And in so many ways, I feel like the most sacred. It is really some of the most sacred work, some of the most important work, I feel, for not only those who are alive here, but for our ancestors and for the earth, for those entering the door into the world.
It's the only guarantee, right? Loss. Whether that's, again, I've said this a few times, we both have, and I think we stress it continuously because we want to just gently start to open people up to this idea that grief is not just death in the physical form. Yes, it is the one we most prominently recognize, but sometimes people someone had shared with me, why am I more upset about the death of my dog than I am of my aunt, and all the ways we shame, criticize, the dialogue we get into, the in acting school, we used to say, like, the way we endow an object and, like, the endowment we put on things. And, like, it's just human nature. Some things affect us more deeply than others. And there's such a narrative around grief. This is another 2-hour episode, capitalistic structure in this country around it, that Brie and I could rant about forever. We'll spare you, but DM us if you want the goods. But there's just so much in a time where you're meant to be supported, held, practicing self-compassion, love for yourself or the folks surrounding you that are going through this experience. There's just so much shame and criticism and shoulds, and we just want to work to change that as much as we can. And we're not the only ones doing this. I think more than ever, we've seen, of course, like, once you start seeking the thing or creating the thing, you'll find all the people that are doing it. So if there's a thing that's wildly unpopular that you do that you love, if you're listening, I would really encourage you to lean into it. I could have never anticipated one long call that Brie and I had would have turned into all of this, and not just a beautiful teaching relationship, but a friendship and someone who I love and admire so much and has been such a beautiful part of my life. And not just in a personal way, in a professional way, and teaching me how to grow and expand as a teacher. So if there's something you do that is wildly unpopular, as long as it's adding goodness to the world and space for people, keep doing it. And I think, yeah, we've found so many more people, so many incredible teachers doing this, and it doesn't need to be all tears and pain. I almost wore my "Leave Me Alone, My Dad Is Dead" t-shirt today. But I thought if someone was turning into the YouTube for the first time, they'd be like, what the hell is this? But there's a lot of laughs and joy and deep, deep connection, not at the pain and not to pathologize. Everything happens for a reason. That's not what this is. It's a totally different, it's hard to describe in words, but I'll include all of the information in the show notes. You can reach out to either of us. If you have any thoughts or feelings, we always have bi-monthly grief circles where you can join us. And it's just a really, if nothing else, such an incredible way to be in community as well, which I think is like a big missing link too in grief work.
Yeah, that was what the word connection, when you said it, was like what was most resonating in my mind. That I think it's being amongst folks who are speaking the same language. There's so much importance in this. And I think it's a real integral part of, I want to use the word healing, but Katie and I often say too with grief work, it's like there's no finish line to being like, okay, I'm all done, I'm all healed, that grief is done. Never really exists. And I think that word capacity, it's so much around like expanding the capacity to hold the grief. The grief never really gets smaller, but our capacity to hold it does. And one of those, being in community in a real way where you don't have to mask how you're feeling or layer in any of those societal pressures around grief of like, oh, I'm the some of the things that we've even heard in our group, like, I'm so sorry for crying. I'm a Debbie Downer. Like, aren't you over it yet? Like, aren't you, like, all these things that kind of get layered in that cause us to suppress ourselves from being in relationship with our grief. Our grief circle, and like Katie said, the many teachers who are also doing this work right now, and shout out to all those who are, thank you, is an opportunity to give your grief a space to breathe.
And I think it also doesn't just expand capacity for self, but so much more capacity and compassion for people who don't grieve exactly like we do.
So good.
That's something I had to really learn the hard way. The difference in even just my family system of like how almost crying for me is almost like an unconscious, it's not even something I can control. It's something that just happens, is almost my body's way of being like, okay, we can't hold on to we don't want to hold on to certain parts of this. Like, we just need to move it. And the way that triggered people in my family, and, you know, how I would respond to their response, it's a whole nother, it's a whole nother level of things, but it gives you so much more compassion. And one of my favorite quotes that we share often in groups, the Melody Beattie quote, "Our willingness and capacity to feel our pain will only be matched by our willingness and capacity to feel our joy." So coming back to these words that you and I have been using and always use, willingness, capacity, I think it's so integrated into what we do in our grief work and our grief spaces.
Yeah, I feel blessed to be doing this work alongside you.
Me too.
Yeah, I think we're a very good yin yang match in this work, and still so many threads and similarities between us.
Me too. And as we just start to wrap up, is there any final thoughts, feelings, gripes? I always say, any thoughts, feelings, gripes that you want to share, a takeaway you'd love the listeners, the viewers to have?
First, just to mention that I created this offering called Earth as Oracle. Just finished the first cohort, and the second will be launching in the fall. And this is a group microdosing journey. And the microdosing is a through line and an ally through the journey, but the greater intention is around cultivating a relationship with the earth in a way that feels resourced and alive and true to you. And this is one of those things that feels like one of the most authentic embodied offerings I've ever created. And this first cohort was really intimate and such a joy, and really, opening to work in a way that's like really shifting the gaze towards like how beautiful life can be. So that's happening in the fall if anyone is curious. And I am taking on one-on-one clients at this time. So if anyone is curious at all about spiritual counseling or any of the other practices that were mentioned, reach out. I'd love to talk. And in closing, just I want to express a deep bow of gratitude to you, Katie, for creating this space and for inviting me into it. It's such an honor. And I'm so proud of you for creating this, truly. I love getting to listen to your show and just see you express yourself in this way. And I think one of my greatest joys in life is witnessing the people that I love the most fully embody their essence and share their magic with the world, because the earth really needs it. So I'm so grateful to be here. And for anyone listening, I pray that if there's something that you want to create or offer to the world, or a part of your essence that's longing to be expressed, or you just want to sing more or hang by the river naked more, or like express yourself in whatever way that is, like I really pray that you find spaces and the courage and compassion within yourself to do that, because the more that we can each stand true in that for ourselves, the more we give others the permission to do so. And I really think we'd be living in a much more beautiful, magical world if we're all had a little bit more willingness to do that. And to look at your shadow, my friends. There's gold in the shadow. Cardinal tells us there's so much gold in that shadow. It's not just scary darkness. There's gifts in that shadow begging you to claim them. So much gold. So I also think the world would be a much better place if we had a stronger relationship with the unconscious and all the ways that the the unconscious is expressing itself. We could probably have a whole podcast just on that.
Amen, my Scorpio queen. I love you so very much. I'm so grateful for you taking the time, sharing your wisdom. We have so many of these same conversations, whether we're in circle or privately, and I always learn something new. And I just feel so lucky that I get to do all of this, our work, our lives, next to one another. And all the information Brie shared will be in the show notes so people can connect with her, reach out to her about her groups. I can't recommend working with her enough. She is even more special than all of this time together portrayed. So thank you. I love you.
I love you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Breathe In, Scream Out with Brie Bednarski. Such an incredible episode. I really loved having this conversation, and really any conversation I have with Brie. All of Brie's information of where you can contact her, follow her, is in the show notes. Information on our training is also in the show notes. A link so you can learn more about destigmatizing grief. Again, we call it a training, but it's really for everyone. It's not just for teachers or therapists or practitioners. In our groups that we've done before, our trainings in the past for destigmatizing grief, we've had such a wide variety of people, everyone bringing their own perspective, experience, open heart. It's been a really beautiful experience, a really beautiful set of groups, and we hope you join this next one. If you're interested, please reach out to myself or to Brie. And I'm so grateful for you taking the time to listen, tune in. I'll be back with my next episode on Wednesday, September 10th. It's a solo episode all about Virgo season, the Pisces full moon, and our second Virgo new moon. We've got 2 Virgo moons. We just passed one, then the Pisces full moon, then the Virgo new moon. It's eclipse season, baby. We're getting into it. So if you are interested in learning more about the Virgo Pisces energy, eclipse season, what it has to offer, where it's affecting your birth chart, tune into the next episode. And I can't wait to breathe in, scream out with you again soon.